it's not about running from something. It's about trying to set up my child to have as positive an experience that fosters and grows them and prevents unnecessary wounds. We can't prevent all wounds. We can make it be a better experience. And that, for me, it's not at all about running. It's about creating an environment that supports our child to have the best experience that we can reasonably expect.
Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Role of parents in dating. Always good to have such conversations with my wife, Sofia. This is a challenging one that we have thought a lot about, and we certainly think that we're still trying to understand it better. So particularly, I think, in this discussion, we want to make very clear that we're not parachuting in to solve people's problems and tell you how that we've done it has gone perfectly. There's a couple things we have absolute confidence in saying about the role of parents in dating. And then there's a lot where we just have some anecdotal evidence and our own responses. And this is all very much conditioned by even our own experience in dating a little while ago. And maybe I'll just say the fact that I've spent the last 30 years of my life trying to mentor college students has also put me in a position, and Sofia with me, of having a real angle to think about this and see a lot going on. So maybe that gives us something a little more worthwhile to say.
Yeah. And I just think that, regardless of what our experience has taught us, I think that hopefully this will be a jumpstart for a conversation for parents to talk about with one another, and then hopefully talk with your children about dating, because it's just a very, very important topic and it touches on a lot of important things. And I think particularly when I think of the young adults who are dating, how we might be in a position to radically change their experience of something that on the one hand can be really amazing and lovely and sweet and good, and can also be really devastating. So I think it's a hard conversation, and we're finding our way. And I think it's just that important to do it, that whatever difficulties there are in the conversation, it's worth slogging through them to try to kind of come to a place where we can really help our children have a better experience.
Amen. Amen. I think we should start with something that's, to my mind, is rather obvious. And I don't want to be offensive here. I don't want to claim to know exactly what's going on, but I am going to be a little on the edge and say one thing that seems pretty clear to me is that the vast majority of parents are not talking enough to their young people about this. And it might seem obvious, but sometimes it's good to go back to the obvious. In fact, in philosophy and seeking wisdom, we go back to the obvious all the time. And sometimes we all need to be reminded of the obvious. And let's begin by reminding ourselves. We say to ourselves, we did not speak enough to our children, prepare them enough, be involved in certain kinds of ways. And it's not going to be about helicoptering. And we're going to talk about how, there's certainly a problem of pretending to have an authority that you don't. It's a problem to give more input at a certain points than is fitting. But by and large, especially when they're younger, especially when they're still under our authority, I think my mind goes especially to fathers and their sons. And the number of young men that I've talked to that clearly have not been prepared for this. And then even very fine young men that are working on assumptions that they shouldn't be working with, that have never been dispelled. Let me just give an obvious one. And here's the thing. We're going to express a concern here about people starting to date too young. And I know this can be controversial. And again, in a case, it can be a conversation starter. And sometimes I've had people say to me, well, you can't live in fear. What, are you just afraid about, sins against chastity? Is that the big thing here? Hey, you gotta embrace life and recognize these things happen. So you can't always be running from that. Well, okay. I certainly grant that and agree with that. And I have no interest in running what shouldn't be run from, although I am interested at the same time in running from what should be run from. But that said, chastity is not the only, though it is certainly a significant consideration here. But I'm just going to go ahead and say a lot of young people, good young people, enter into dating, I think, with seriously bad, wrong expectations
Mhm.
about the realm of expressing affection. They have been told that certain things are sins, but they haven't really been directed what is fitting. And we're not gonna go into that in any detail here. That's not the story that we want to tell. It's not the fish that we want to fry right now. But can we start with part of this conversation is especially going to be, I think fathers need to talk to their sons and to their daughters, and mothers, in any case, for sure, need to talk to their daughters. But I think both sons and daughters have something very important they need to hear from their father about the realm of chastity and about, speaking to their sons. When it does come time for dating, be prepared that you're going to want to do certain things that you absolutely should not do. Some of those, even if they're not sinful, the question is not simply what's sinful or not. The question is what is fitting and appropriate and is going to build this relationship. And
Mhm.
the vast majority of people that you'd think would have been formed otherwise have not been given any clear principles or enough on that, for instance.
Okay, well, before we dive in, I just want to back up for a minute. Two things that you said. First of all, just because this really struck me, I want to say this first, even though it's kind of the second point, the issue about running from something. I don't think in our conversation that we're about to have, and I don't think this is our attitude. For me, it's not about running from something. It's about trying to set up my child to have as a positive an experience that fosters and grows them and prevents unnecessary wounds. We can't prevent all wounds. We can make it be a better experience. And that, for me, it's not at all about running. It's about creating an environment that supports our child to have the best experience that we can reasonably expect, right?
Mm.
And in the context of that, we're all human beings and things aren't quite right, et cetera, and they become part of the story of who we are, even if there are wounds. But I do think that this area is such an important area that it shouldn't be something that's cast to the wind and kind of like, well, let's just see what comes out. Well, let's see what those crazy kids do. It's far too important of an area to have that type of attitude about it. So that's number one. I just want to underscore, for me, in any case, it's not about running. It's
Good.
about
I'm with
it's
you.
about making something good. And then the other thing is just that you had said the obvious point of speaking to our children about it. And I actually think it's, while on the one hand it sounds obvious, it's not obvious, at least in the doing of it. Because realistically speaking, children who are growing into adolescence and are experiencing the kind of electricity of opposite sex attraction, and discovering all that for the first time, it is exceedingly new for them. And it's something that of its nature makes a person shy. Now, if you have a 100% sanguine child who just talks, says everything, wears everything on his sleeve, maybe it's not going to be an issue for you. But my
Mhm.
experience is that it's actually kind of an awkward moment of transition for a child that's not comfortable for them. And so I think the chances are pretty high that your child is not going to come to you and express things to you as they're experiencing them, that the responsibility kind of lies more with the parent to have some type of an awareness or a plan of how they're going to meet their child, one, in a difficult transition of adolescence, and then have that meeting in that transition be something that sets the stage for being able to have fruitful conversations about something that's actually pretty private for a child or a young adult, pretty intimate to them, kind of the affairs of the heart and things that they're interested in that way. So I think that while on the one hand, it's obvious, on the other hand, it's not a simple thing to do because of the nature of what we're talking about. And so I think it
Okay.
can't be taken
Yeah.
for granted. I think it should be a first principle for us is that we have to be standing at the ready and we need to be prepared to talk about these things with our children and to kind of educe things from them and to create an environment that gives us permission to speak where it would be good for us to speak, but we can't go there without permission. So,
I think that's an absolutely great point. And I stand corrected. And we don't need to expose any parents right now or talk about who exactly has done what. But I do affirm what you're saying by saying with confidence, you're right. It must not be obvious because of the number, how frequent it is that it hasn't been done. The number of people say, my parents did not have this conversation with me. And I think maybe often we parents think we've said more than we have. Is it that? I mean,
or we lead with example. We think that surely our good marriage is example to them of what they should be looking for, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And we fail to actually explicitly say certain things that could be
Yeah.
otherwise misinterpreted.
Or maybe we've talked about examination of conscience and the sixth and ninth commandments. We've formed them that certain things are sins. Again, it's even all the more clear to me right now in saying this, that certain things are sinful, sins against chastity or sins against the sixth and ninth commandment is related, but is a very distinct
Yeah.
thing from, son, like to have a conversation because you're coming to that wonderful time in life where a whole new world is opening before you of your wonderful and natural attraction to young ladies, but an attraction that, given the fall of man, given original sin and its effects, is one that's very difficult to manage. And for starters, son, I want you to know I'm always going to be here and be with you because daddy has gone through this himself. And in many ways, this is an ongoing part of daddy's life that we must be always working broadly in the area of the wonderful and beautiful virtue of temperance and more specifically of chastity. According to your state in life, whatever you're going to be called to do, it's a great gift that you have this power that God has given you. You have these natural desires that God has given you. But at the same time, for them to come to fruition according to God's plan, you're going to need to be strong and be disciplined and have good principles whereby to think about these things. And I and your mother and other mentors are going to be here to help you think about this because you're going to need that assistance. We're not going to force it on you, but we're here for you. I mean, boom, already just that, just that opens that door and is the beginning of the kind of conversations. Again, in this way, we need to use all of our kind of winningness of thinking about when we're not just again crashing in with rules. We're coming in affirming there's something beautiful, there's something wonderful. We're setting you up for success. This is not something to be afraid of, but it is something to be serious about. And it very much, son or daughter, is a matter of timing. And one thing I can pretty much assure you, dear or son, is that you're going to find yourself wanting certain things, various kinds here, before it's their time. And that's just part of God's plan. And it's going to be a beautiful way that God is going to grow you and that you're going to grow your relationships by willing to say no in various and sundry ways. And frankly, one of those might begin with, I'm attracted to somebody, this person is attracted back to me. And so we're going to want to start to kind of separate ourselves off and start to spend this more kind of special romantic time moving into, that moves very quickly into something that we'll just call dating here. And by dating, I'm basically referring to some type of steady romantic relationship. And that is something that, again, a big part of this is very clear from my experience. Now, I'm just saying this to you. I'm not speaking to my child anymore. I'm saying this here to you, dear, that the young people are not being formed of what questions do they ask themselves about, okay, well, do I start to pair off with this person? Is the fact that I'm attracted to this person attracted to me, is that itself a sign that now it is time to pair off? I say this to my freshmen in college all the time. I understand that it feels like, hey, I'm a serious guy. I take my faith seriously. She's a serious young lady. She takes her faith serious. I'm attracted to her. She's attracted to me. This is not just, this is sexual attraction. This is something richer and more. Yep. This is all true. Therefore, we're going to start to spend time together and pursue this. And one of the biggest things that at least needs to be raised is, how do we think about that timing? How do we ask ourselves, should we actually start doing this or not? Are parents giving their children, when they go off to college, the principles and the tools to ask themselves that, when is it right to start such a relationship? So I should start by saying here, you and I are of the opinion, we could talk about it more, though in previous ages, it might have been the case that a 17-year-old was old enough to date. Pretty much my experience is universally, those in high school are not prepared for dating. When I say that, I mean some type of, this is the two of us relationship. Taking someone out on a date is not what I'm calling dating. But dating is, we have a relationship, you and I.
That's exclusive.
And, we're starting to see one another. You're my boyfriend, you're my girlfriend. And our approach to that is pretty much universally, parents have the authority and should use that authority to say, we understand better. We understand why you want to do this. This is not evil. We're going to be there with you. We're going to support you. Not going to make them feel guilty about it. But no, you may not date. Now is not the time. If you're my son, I owe it to the other young ladies in the community to say to you, no, I'm not going to let you date. And if you're my daughter, I have an obligation to my daughter to protect her. Again, not just chastity, the whole emotional, the whole cycle, the whole thing, by saying, no, dear, I'm not going to let you date in high school.
Mhm.
College, they're outside of that's our view. We can't tell you anymore whether you're going to date or not, but we're going to give you some principles. Does that, have I reasonably presented how we think about that?
Yeah, I think so. So it almost seems like the conversation just has two prongs, so to speak. One prong is how do we talk to them about dating and how do we form them to think about dating? And then, of course, the other prong is, well, what do we think about dating, right? And so,
Right.
so to even discuss like when is the appropriate time to date and why, et cetera, that's a separate question that maybe we as parents have to determine before the conversation with the children, right? So that we have to have a clarity. So let's just pursue that for a little bit. I mean, you mentioned that we feel that high school is too early to have an exclusive dating relationship, and even the first several years of college.
I would say
Couple.
several. Pretty clearly the first. I'm going to say pretty
Okay.
clearly the first.
Super. So the beginning part of college is maybe also kind of falls into that category. I guess I think it would be good for us to explicitate why. I mean, there is the obvious issue of chastity and behavioral norms in relation to chastity and things like that. But to me, that's like the very broad stroke. I mean,
Mhm,
I'm hoping
mhm.
that that is a very important kind of obvious thing. In our conversations, there are actually other issues that are at stake here in this question. I'm wondering, can I just draw you out a little bit more? Like, what are some of the other kind of slightly more nuanced reasons? Because I think if parents are going to be discussing this amongst one another, there has to be a little bit more nuance to
Absolutely.
chew
And I'm
on.
going to draw you out too. But I mean, fundamentally a matter of maturity. But let's get more specifically, because I have this discussion. Sometimes parents have said to me, and I understand. They're saying to me, Dr. Scott, John, I don't think that I don't think you realize how mature my child might be. There are varying degrees of maturity.
Yeah, I
I,
guess I
I,
do want to say to you, what do you mean by mature? That they lack the maturity. So there are various ways in which a person can be mature. So let's just
right.
parcel that
No, no,
out a
no,
tiny
right,
bit.
right, right. No, I mean, and that's where I found myself recently saying, to be honest, even the most mature young man or young lady who's 17 or 18 and in high school, I'm still going to say, if they're under my authority, that that you may not date, because there's an awful lot of maturity. I mean, maturity, of course, I don't think there's an absolute definition for it, in as much as it's just the growing to the full stature,
Hmm.
spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, as well as
Hmm.
physically, being a human person. I mean, it obviously includes a growth in character, but also includes a certain richness of experience. Is the notion of self-possession. That's a term that your father, the philosopher, God rest his soul, used a bit. And he likes to say, if you don't possess yourself, you're not in a position yet to give yourself. So I would cast it just using somewhat broader than very broad strokes. Marriage is always a proximate preparation for marriage.
Is
I'm sorry.
approximate. Yeah.
Dating is approximate. Approximate is the
Hmm.
wrong word. It means close. Now, there can be some variation, just exactly how close, but you have
Hmm.
to start with certain things. It's approximate. I think that's long been the right understanding. You don't date unless marriage is in some way proximate, reasonably close, and so that means you have to be fairly close to
Capable
having the
of,
maturity
yeah.
of marriage.
Hmm.
And obviously grow somewhat more during
Hmm.
dating, but I mean, already to some extent, dating, again, this is exclusive kind of romantic relationship between two, is fundamentally a discernment, in certain ways a practice for marriage. You have to know who you are, have to have an absolute, you have to have a very strong moral character. You have to have a certain prudential experience, life experience. Again, now when I start to say these things, again, someone could easily say, well, golly, by that, then, who's ever going to be ready to be married? Well, they are. They are. And I suppose when it comes down to it, I'm in a good position because I see people come out of high school, and for 30 years, watch them come out of high school and then get done college. And one thing I would say with a lot of confidence, the vast, vast majority of them absolutely, when they arrive at college, are not the type of person that right then should be proximately preparing for marriage. But many of them, by the time they're done college,
Yeah.
you just have a sense, there's a certain amount of intuition there. It's just, there's a lot of maturing
Mm-hmm.
that happens in those key young adult years. Now, I might say, what about those who don't go to college? We can talk about that. The
Mm-hmm.
vast majority of young people do go to college. And those who don't go to college are going to look for other kind of ways of maturing
Mm-hmm.
in a community at the ages of 18 and 19 and 20 and 21.
So do you think that, and this is obviously a little bit of an simplification, but as a litmus test, do you think it's reasonable for a parent to say, could I see this person getting married proximately?
I think that's exactly the
And
question
I
that should
think
be
that,
asked.
honestly, I think in a lot of situations, if a parent asks that, ask themselves that about a particular child in a dating situation, I could see them going, oh my gracious, married? No way. Like, but not just getting married, but bearing children, bearing the responsibility, financial, emotional, prudential responsibility for the care of a family, et cetera, et cetera. If we applied those standards, I think that it might be helpful to say the whole notion of dating being approximate to marriage is kind of important. I do want to say another thing about just go back to maturity, because when we say that someone is not mature, it's very important to me that people
Mature
not
enough.
take that,
Sure enough.
or even when we talk about maturity versus immaturity, if we say they're too immature to be dating,
Mhm.
very often the word immature is used as kind of an insult or a slander or something like that. We don't mean it that way.
No.
When we say immature, we're saying immature in the sense that you would say of a bald eagle that does not yet have its fully white hood or its white feathers. They are simply not at that point. And
Right.
so this is not a negative statement about your 17-year-old. Or this is, I think, why people say, well, my daughter is very, very mature. She's only 17, but she's very mature. And I'm sure that she's very mature in some ways, but there's another part of maturity that is simply called this just ripening that can only really happen through experience. And that's what we're talking about when we're saying there has to be a certain level of maturity in order to be able to handle a dating situation in a way that is beneficial for both parties.
Yes, perfect. And something very important just struck me as you were saying this. I might have a child who's 17, who's very mature compared to peers. But a very important part of maturation is certain kinds of adult-ish or mature interactions with your peers. If your child is notably out in front of those around him or her, that actually, that still doesn't make up for the fact that the child cannot have a certain amount of mature interactions with peers. You're not going to have your 17-year-old running off and just spending time with 21-year-olds, but you have to have, this is why the college years are so important. There's so many things that happen you just have to work through that are really hard. It's like
Yeah.
now we're independent of our parents' authority. Now we're making decisions for our own, and we just are trying to work out all kinds of stuff. This is the ripening thing. You just got to be in it and you got to do it. It doesn't matter how well prepared someone has been in good, solid character and innocence, but that they haven't had the life experiences that come to a young adult only through interacting with other young adults, which, by the way, is also a reason why so many, even in college, still don't get the maturing that they really should have, because if they're, frankly, again, seen it up close and personal, if you're hanging out with the wrong people in college, you're hanging out with a bunch of people that still act like they're in high school. And if the people that you're spending most of your time with are still acting like they're in high school, you're not going to get the adult-ish maturing experience that you need to get. And I'm sorry to say it, but there's plenty of 21 and 22-year-olds out there that you don't want marrying your 21 or 22-year-old. And it's not necessarily because they've got the wrong moral principles or they lack faith in God. It's
But they're
just
not
simply
formed yet.
they have not gotten the human formation. One of those formations that when you go to the seminary, one human formation. Human formation is an extremely important aspect of life today. And that's the one that especially just takes a certain amount of time,
Right.
and even time in a reasonable context, not just any time. So this is a big part of why we think carefully, what community are we going to put them in for those years of college, for those young adult years, so they'll be getting even then the maturation they should.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like in this kind of two-pronged approach, which is the principles that the parents hold that they're going to pass on to the children and the speaking to the children part, is that it sounds like we need to be speaking to our children or be aware and starting creating an environment in which we can speak to our children about these things pretty early on. But it's not necessarily the case that, are teaching them everything they need to know about the right attitude, et cetera, does not necessarily mean that they're ready. Right. So they can have all these principles. As a matter of fact, it seems to me that it is important to start early and to create a conversation in which these topics are discussed. And they're all concepts and they're all real and they're present. They're part of our conversation and they're kind of what lays fallow while then the child is doing their personal job of maturing. And then at some point, at the appropriate moment where both the child has the maturity and the concepts are present and have been percolating and kind of growing, especially in relation to their growing understanding and capacity of self-control and self-knowledge, then the moment is correct. So there are kind of two things that happen there.
I think it's a great way of putting it. And some people want to say, well, how do you know the time? How do you know the time? Look, life is challenging here. The proverbial question, how do I know he or she is the right one? Mm-hmm. There's no absolute answer to that. Your father had that frustrating answer. Mm-hmm. You'll know when you know.
Thanks a lot.
But of course, there is sure. something to that, and particularly if we're all working together, parents doing their part, young people doing their part, willing to wait, willing to be disciplined, growing in their interior life, trying to form good friendships. This is part of it. The whole human and emotional and spiritual formation is all part of growing them. I think we have to be aware that sometimes people wish they lived 100 years ago when so many things were more sane. Okay, a lot of things were more sane 100 years ago. I don't think we ought to make the mistake of, and 100 years ago, people could just start, good, young, innocent people could start dating when they were 18. That might be the case 100 years ago. We can't pretend we're living 100 years ago for any number of reasons. Mm-hmm. And I'm just sharing that my experience has been pretty much universally. There's a lot of great young people out there. I don't have a negative view. I love them to death. Tons of positive things to say, but I'm confident that just the way the whole structure is now with kind of high school, college, and the growing actually problem. We've had another podcast discussion on the challenge of responsibility and forming the young in responsibility. There's so many things about the age in which we live that retards, that puts off growing in responsibility. Growing in a sense of responsibility is a big part of maturation. And it's just happening later. This is a problem. Can we all recognize nothing is going to make this be easier? Someone pointed out to me not that long ago. I thought, oh my goodness, there it is. We need to recognize this. The fact that we still are young men and women are coming to bodily maturity at the same time as it were, or even earlier, maybe due to certain chemical influences than they always did. But their maturation has been put off. So this makes it hard that there's years in there where they're having the
ready,
hormonal
but
experience.
They're not ready.
They're really attracted already, but they haven't had the human formation. To me, this is all the more reason we got to be on the ball. We got to have those tight relationships. This is our marriage relationship. It begins with the spousal relationship. Working a good relationship with the children begins by working on my relationship with my spouse, that deep relationship of trust and closeness to them and staying involved in their lives. And be there. And we can even have that very conversation. Hey, you know what? In this day and age, more so than in the past, you're going to be at bodily maturity at a point where it's still probably not going to be the right point for you to start to date. So you're going to be having these hormonal experiences. You're going to be attracted to people. You're going to be wanting to do certain things. We're there with you, but this is a challenge you're going to have to face. It's okay. We can deal with this by the grace of God, because we're all in this together. But we need to recognize that makes this all the more challenging. But the answer is not to pretend that they're more mature than they are.
Yeah.
Again, we still might come to the point where we say, okay, you know what, we're going to make a little compromise here. Gosh, we really wish they were a little more mature, but maybe, now's the time for them to start. There are things like that. I could tell a story that I'm not going to tell right now, where I made a choice even in giving direction to somebody important. Like, okay, in the abstract, maybe we would have wanted you to wait a little while longer, but in the concrete, maybe this is the time to go ahead.
So just to kind of recap it, because the title of her conversation was the role of parents in courtship and dating. And so it seems to me that, first of all, the first role is for us to come to an understanding with one another as spouses about what is at
Mm-hmm.
stake. What are the principles involved? What do we want for our children? How do we want to form them? So that would be the first step. And then the second step would to be, and I think this is maybe perhaps the most important, create an environment in which you are able to have conversations with your children about sensitive, deep, or more intimate things. And that is not just in relation to dating. We're creating that environment all the time by having a loving, respectful relationship in which our children can trust us. So even when they're very
Amen.
little, we're beginning to get ready for those conversations because we're making a space that's safe for them to share intimate things with us and things that are hard or painful for them. So that will stand us in great stead. And when we come to this transition in a child's life from childhood to adolescence, where a lot of these things are an issue, and then maintaining the relationship of possible conversations so that when our child is in a situation where they want to have a relationship or having a relationship, that we actually have permission to come in and weigh in. So I'm talking about emotional permission.
Yep.
Sometimes we have factual permission if the child is young enough.
That's right.
And then as parents, to be prepared to support our children when we're no longer in a place of authority, where we say yes or no, but that we continue that conversation with our child, because whatever their courtship or dating situation is, any dating or courtship situation benefits from a conversation with someone who knows us. And so it's to remain present with our children, even beyond the place where we are giving them direction through our authority, but we give them direction through our relationship.
That's an absolutely great way of putting it. And hopefully, when our authority stops, basically, when they go to college, right around 18, now it's super important transition to now we're here to support you. We're here to mentor you. We're not here to act with authority. And we're going to be here for you. Hopefully we've set, but what you've been saying, the way of saying is we've set it up in such a way that they're going to want to come to us. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And we can't force ourselves into their lives. Another thing I really want to emphasize, this is about having you've said it well. I want to say it again. A positive approach. The whole realm of romantic relationships is a beautiful thing. We're not scaring them off from it because they're so important, because they're so beautiful, because they're so rich and wonderfully demanding. We just have to be properly prepared. And so we don't want to give them the sense of, well, anything negative. I want to just really quickly before I wrap up, even just say a nod, at least in the direction of things we say to sons and the things we say to daughters. We're not going to make our daughters think that all guys are a problem and are going to be
predatory.
Are predatory. We're not going to treat our sons as though they're predatory, but we're going to be realistic, aware, and right there. Again, fathers to sons, I'm right there with you, son. Here's the challenges I had. Here's the challenges I think you're going to have. Here's how we can work on them together. Here's some recommendations I have for you. You can do this. You might fall. The mercy of God is all encompassing. And here we go. So let's, and we have to be willing to get specific. Again, I think far too few parents are getting specific. It's at the right time, but it's when dating is getting close. When dating is getting close, then, or it's time for dating. And it's, son, I'm going to give you a few directions here, not in authority, but I'm mentoring you. Here are certain things that you want to avoid, pitfalls to be careful of. Here's some things to remember about the male role, that he's the initiator. He's the one that asks out a young lady, but he comes always with a spirit of reverence, and that any woman that he approaches in this way, he immediately is in a role of being a kind of protector. Not to pretend that you have any authority over her or you're anyway her head, but you do have to come with respect and kind of with a responsibility. If I'm taking you out on a date, I'm responsible for you, and this is beautiful, and it should be painted beautifully. And the flip side, of course, is in part conveying to the young ladies, this is the kind of young man that you need to have an eye out for. They do need to be, they absolutely, especially in this day and age, they simply need to be told about the other kind of young man, especially if they're attractive, especially the more physically attractive they are, but all in any case. But it has to be said. Some men are going to come towards you in this way, and it might not be immediately evident that they are. But we do this very carefully. It's not making them distrust all men, but it's walking that line of being alert to a real distinction, a real challenge that there is, and paint the positive of a young man that seems to be someone that is approaching you. Maybe say, son, as I try to approach your wife, or a mother saying to her daughter, as your father approaches me. This is the type of thing you're looking for, dear, when it comes to the young men, and it gets more specific and talked about that in very concrete ways.
I think that's a great point. And I'll just add finally that, especially for the young ladies, if their dad is interested in taking care of them by preparing them for relationships, they will feel protected and will be much less vulnerable to a situation where their emotions are engaged and yet the man is not actually taking care of her. And so I think that it's very important for dads to be present to show their daughters that as you go into these relationships that nothing is sure yet, you're trying to discover, you're always protected by me. And so that
Yeah.
really helps a young woman have confidence to stand up for herself if she feels like the man that she's with is not respecting her or is not protecting her.
I want to just say that one back again. I mean, that a daughter be directly told in this context, you are precious. You are so wonderful. You are so worthy. And you can, should, must expect this of all of others to respect you. And if you are ever not being respected, I want you to know that my heart is with you and I am there saying to you, now is the time to stand up for yourself.
For sure. I just think that that's the most important thing is that these a huge moment in our children's lives and we need to be there and be present. We need to be prepared to be present. We need to be present in our heart, in our conversations, in our support of them so that we're able to help them have it be the most positive experience they can have.
Starting again, we haven't gone here into the exact time appropriate times. We're really focusing on starting to have conversations about these things, maybe in a certain kind of way, early teens, and then just getting more specific. There's no absolute plan there, but no one's going to do this for us. We are the ones that need to have the conversation as spouses. If we're a single parent or a parent without a spouse where we can really do this with, we're going to have to then do our best on our own, and God will be with us and to be involved there while they in certain ways while they are under our authority, and hopefully then in such a way that even for many years to come after that, we'll be able to be present to them in such a wonderful, challenging, beautiful part of their life.
God willing.
Amen. Thanks, dear. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.